You're watching Fairfield Public Access Television. I'm Susan Kessel, and we're here today with Susie Nita Mayer, who lives out in the country of Fairfield. How long have you lived in Fairfield area?
Oh, since 1980.
1980, quite a while.
Yeah, and actually I grew up in Iowa City, so I feel like almost home here.
Yeah, native Iowan.
Right.
Well, I was reading the newspaper the other day, and I saw this article about Ukrainian Easter eggs, or Ukrainian eggs, and it also has another name,
Pysanky.
Pysanky. I never knew how to say that, but it's springtime in Fairfield, and I thought what a wonderful time to talk about this art, this craft. I used to do batik, so I was especially attracted to this art form. And also, in the paper this last week, in the Courier and the Ledger, was an insert about Ukrainian Easter eggs and how they're decorated and made. So this gave me a lot of answers or questions to ask you. First of all, how did you get started doing this?
Well, I got started actually in a very good way. We visited the Ukraine in 1990. My husband and I were there for 6 months, and every time we'd go visit somebody, we'd see their grandmother's beautiful eggs that they had still preserved in the cabinet. This kind of egg making seems to have become the primary folk representation for the Ukraine. And I thought how incredibly gorgeous these eggs are. And I never really thought about doing it while we were over there, but I came back and decided I wanted to try my hand at it. And I started with very crude homemade tools. You know, we made a little stick with a copper funnel on the end, and I attempted, you know, to use just regular paraffin and melt it on there and use food coloring for dye, and got very crude results, you know, it wasn't very good. And then I discovered a little catalog that has the official supplies.
Really?
It tells you how to do it. And over several years I developed my technique and got better, and it's just been something I do and enjoy every year.
Oh, they are absolutely gorgeous. They're so intricate, the designs. The article I was reading said the designs have some meaning. Do they have meaning for you, or do you just create?
Well, I know the traditional meanings for them, and I've actually participated in some of the traditional uses for these eggs. They actually have a sort of talismanic value according to their tradition. You make them for specific purposes or for specific people. For example, in the Ukrainian tradition, one of the very important things is that the animals were fertile. So you'd put certain fertility or, you know, reproductive kind of symbols on certain eggs, and then you'd hang those eggs in the barn, you know, and that would ensure the fertility of your animals. Also, you'd put maybe harvest symbols, wheat and flowers and grain on a certain egg. And before you would start your garden or your farming in the spring, you'd actually dig a hole, put this incredibly beautifully decorated egg in the hole, bury it. You know, you're offering it to nature to take care of your harvest for that year. So I've done that. I used to have a herd of goats, and I'd put eggs down in the goat barn, and I buried them before I start my, you know, gardening in the spring. But, you know, it's just part of participating in that tradition.
Right, just tradition. And also, I have to mention, if you hear some little peeping noises over here, she's got some little baby chicks, about not even a week old.
5 days old.
5 days old. They're so cute. Do you raise these specifically for the eggs?
Oh, I don't. Well, we raise them for the eggs, of course, but mainly to eat the eggs.
Okay.
But I also do enjoy decorating the brown eggs sometimes. I have always get chickens that lay the brown eggs. Yeah, and I think those were, you know, traditionally done, and it gives a much more sort of muted, subtler, sort of almost antique-y look to the egg. This egg, for example, with the fish on it, it's very muted and very subtle, and it was done using one of my own chickens' brown eggs. But mainly we just raise them because I really like chickens, and also we do eat the eggs. Yeah.
So later we'll get a little view of the peeping chickens. You do this art at home, and you have taught classes. Just recently, I think you had a class of 10, and I was saying next year we'll have to get the Art Association to have you teach a class, because I would love to do this.
Yeah, it's really, really fun to share this beautiful art. In fact, part of the tradition is that it's done by women only. And
really?
Yeah, only by women. And also it's done when they're in a very sort of peaceful and pure state. They've refrained from having arguments with their family during that day, and it's done late into the night. And it's not done like quilting, you know, with a lot of chatting. It's done with a lot of focused intent to put, you know, the power into these eggs, you know, and the meaning and all that into them. So, you know, it's a very nice thing to do. In fact, some friends of mine that do these eggs get together with me, and we just do them for fun, you know, also. So it's
now, in this article I was reading, she was from the Ukraine, and she wanted to keep this tradition alive within her family. But she only does them during the 40 days of Lent for the real, true Ukraine tradition. And she learned it from a priest, only does it 40 days. So she said she worked really hard and stayed up late at night and didn't do anything else. So.
Well, traditionally, apparently these families would make like several hundred eggs during this springtime, and they'd make it for the whole use for the whole year. Some of the things that are done with the eggs are that they are given by young people to, like a young girl would give several to her boyfriend. They're put, you know, maybe in the coffin of a baby who's passed on. Ones with very certain symbolic values are given to very older people, you know, that have the ladder function on them, and that indicates the ladder to heaven. And children, you know, young adults are given eggs with a lot of white on them, indicating that they have the whole clean blank slate of their life ahead of them. Children are often given eggs with flowers on them, you know, just to indicate that purity and innocence that children have.
Oh, it's really interesting when you get to read this. Things like the purest tradition, she would only use eggs that were raw. They haven't been boiled and they haven't been blown out. And then she would give them to her family, and then sometimes they would poke a little hole in it and blow it out. Would you do this artwork before you blow it out or after?
Yeah, actually what you do, the very most effective way to do it is you have your egg completely whole, completely raw. As soon as you boil the egg, it has a tendency to take the dye much less well. So it's very important actually to use the raw egg. And then the reason you leave it full and heavy for dyeing is because that egg has to sink in the dye. If you've already blown it out, it floats there on top, and you have to use all sorts of weights to keep it down, and then the dye gets into the holes, and then it's draining and dripping this dye all over the place.
So it's a practical...
It's very practical.
Because I was worried when I read this that after you did it and then you poked the hole and you blew it, I could just see it just
I've
crumbling.
had that happen. You know, I have this this blower where you only have to make one hole in the bottom instead of the two holes, so you don't have to blow it with your mouth. It has this little bulb that inserts air into the bottom hole, and that forces the egg out.
Really?
So it's a very high-tech egg blower. But I have spent hours on an egg. You have to be very, very careful.
I used to get a headache and like
Yeah.
sore.
Oh, it's terrible blowing out
Yeah.
eggs. So I'm very, very grateful to have found this. For many years, I didn't blow out any of my eggs. For example, this goose egg is, it was made for my husband and my 20th anniversary, so it was made 5 years ago. It has never been blown out. It's actually quite light now compared to a goose egg. What happens is that there's a membrane inside the eggshell, and the membrane allows water to escape, water to come out of the egg, but no water to come into the egg. So eventually, you know, you can have a never blown out egg that becomes completely light and is just there for permanent value. Now, one of the reasons I do like to blow them out is because I like to put a polyurethane gloss on them. It really helps them shine, but when you put that on there, it really retards the ability of that egg to dry out naturally.
Okay.
So I do prefer to dry them out, because if it does break after several years, it's not a very pleasant experience.
I've had that happen.
Yeah.
I've done Easter eggs over the years and kept them, and lots of times they were boiled and they still dried out a little, but not completely.
Yeah. I just always feel that it's much safer to have a blown out egg. So if I'm going to use them to bury in the garden, I keep the wholeness of the egg. I just leave it, as nature created it. But
now, where do you get, you said you started with more primitive tools, and then where do you get this little catalog, and is it hard to
No, it's
find?
very easy. Actually, if you do a search on the internet on Ukrainian eggs, you will get several companies that come up that sell the different items that you need for decorating the egg, and the kind of dyes that you need, and the little implements. If you want to hand me those there, those are called Kistkas, and these are the implements that you actually fill with the candle wax.
So it's burning and melting, and you fill that little thing.
And you fill it, and then you hold it over this flame until it's nice and liquid, and there's a very tiny little hole on the end. And then you can draw the wax onto the egg at that point. And you keep reheating it because it cools off, and you keep reheating it and reusing it.
So how, I know when I did batik, I was just constantly.
Yeah, you're back and forth and back and forth. But it does stay because there's a certain amount of mass of metal there. It stays, for maybe a good minute. That's not bad.
No.
A whole minute of being able to draw on it.
Does it, just thinking of the other batik process, does it get plugged?
Yes, occasionally it does, and what I use to unplug it, because they're tiny little holes, especially for the white one, which is the very finest tip. The blue one's the medium tip, and this is for coloring in larger areas.
Okay, so they're different sizes.
Yeah, I use these tiny, tiny little wires, and you can insert them in there, and that unplugs the tips.
Okay.
So that's something I've discovered
Things
on my
that you
own.
have learned by doing it.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Boy, where do we start? Let's talk about the actual process.
Okay. So the actual process of making an egg, you start with just a white unboiled egg, and in order to get it to take the dye better, I put it in a solution for several minutes of 1/3 vinegar and 2/3 water. And that acid solution actually eats a little bit into the shell, and you'll see the little bubbles starting to form from this chemical reaction, and it allows the dyes to take much better and gets rid of any kind of surface that might have gotten onto the egg, in the store or the, the process. And then you need to actually divide your egg symmetrically, because you need to really get a very exact design on there, and you'll create the design that you want on there very lightly with pencil. And the interesting thing, as soon as you put the wax on and you rub it off, what you put on there in pencil will never show. You don't have to erase it, it just never shows.
Do you ever do any eggs without the pencil design first?
No, I don't.
It's probably very
actually.
risky.
Yeah. You just really want to know where things are. And then, if you make a mistake on your pencil design when you're actually doing the design in wax later, you just make little corrections and little perfections on it. So first you sketch it on there in pencil. And then anything that you want to remain white on that egg, you need to cover with wax. And you start, of course, with the lightest colors first, because you'll be sequentially dipping in different colors of dye, getting darker and darker.
Now, do you always use kind of a light color wax?
Well,
just enough color to see what you're doing?
What happens is that when you actually put this, as you can see, the outside of that copper thing has gotten very dark. And you always have to use beeswax, by the way. Paraffin does not cover properly.
Okay.
So you use beeswax, and putting it in the flame tends to make a little carbonized surface around there, and so it will draw on kind of dark. Okay. As you can see, this is darker than if you had just used plain, yellow beeswax. Okay. So it automatically, results in a darker wax. So you put everything, that you're going to remain white. So a lot of the outlined areas are going to be white. And, a lot of white actually is in this egg. A lot of the main design elements are white. And then we dip that whole egg in yellow. And then in this particular egg, we have these little flame things in every one of the triangles that we put just a little yellow flame down there. So we don't do much in yellow on this egg.
So you're always going from light to dark.
Yeah.
Now, are there some colors that don't dye over each other?
Absolutely. If you can imagine dyeing the whole egg green and then red, what do you
brown.
come up? Yeah,
yucky brown.
Right. So whenever you use green, what you need to do is take your dye and then a little toothpick, and then you actually paint that on, and then you blot it, and then you cover that little green area.
So are you doing wax around it to contain that dye so it isn't spilling out?
Sometimes you do that, but if you have a toothpick, you can actually be pretty precise about it. A lot of times you're putting green within an already created circle of dye, so it's very contained. But you know, you can put like a dot, you know, in each of these triangles, for example, and then just very carefully cover it. And if you don't cover it, a little bit smears out, the other colors will take care of it. Yeah. So I didn't happen to use any dye in this particular egg. We're just sort of doing sequential dips.
So you can see that whole egg is yellow, and you're just keeping the tiny bit of yellow.
Yeah, a tiny bit of yellow.
You can see in this one where you have kept it.
Right. So I've kept the yellow, and on top of the yellow, I'm just making that flame turn a little bit more orange. So we're just adding a touch more orange on this flame. Very little orange added. So that's the orange dip. Then we dip the whole egg in red. And I wanted the main star design on both ends to be red. So I had to do major covering, so I used the large whole Kistka for that. And then coloring in the whole rest of that flame area, large flame within each of the circled areas. This is sort of a overlapping fish scale kind of pattern with ladders.
It's kind of a tricky way of thinking. It's kind of a reverse.
Yeah, kind of a backwards thing.
And when I did batik for 15 years, you know, you kind of get it down.
Right.
But when you're first starting, it's a little bit tricky.
It is. It's a little challenging. So I did a lot of red coverage on this because I wanted to have a nice strong red flavor to it. And then usually the final color is black or dark blue, something like that. Now the unfortunate thing is that the dark blue dyes that are available really aren't that powerful. Really sort of all covering dark, you know. So a lot of times the final color is a black color. So I've done the dipping of this egg into the black dye. As you can see, each layer of the color tends to stand out, but it's still kind of a muddied look because of all the wax on it. I've not actually yet removed the wax from this egg, so I don't have a completed one to show you. Okay,
so by the time you get done, it's all covered with wax except for where you put the last color.
Right.
And it's a resist technique.
So the way one removes wax at the end is that you light the candle, you hold it over it, very close to it but not actually in it, so that it melts the wax off, and then you just wipe it with a paper towel, and you just systematically do that around the whole egg, and then it's completely cleaned off. Actually, you know what? I missed a step. While it's still covered with wax, this is when I blow the egg out.
Oh, is that why?
Well, the reason is, okay, what I do is I would cover this whole bottom end because all the colors are exactly like I want them. I'd cover it with beeswax because this dye is actually water soluble. So if some of this stuff coming out sort of gets on it, it smears the colors and all that. So I cover it with wax and then I hold a paper towel around it. We do the blowing out, and then when it's completely emptied, then I remove the wax from it.
So all of these eggs the dye is water soluble?
Yes.
So you can't get them wet?
Well, that's another reason that I spray them with a polyurethane, to give them a gloss, and so that, you know, if some little drop of water gets on them, it's not a problem. You won't suddenly have smeared dye.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of dye do you use?
The dyes that they sell, you know, that really work well for these are aniline dyes. You know, it's just a chemical name for the kind of dye that they use.
And I bet, do you have little, I used to carry buckets of dye. I keep them for years and years. Little jars?
Yes, I have just little canning jars, pint canning jars full of the dye. They're actually in the kitchen. I try not to ever bring them out here, lest I tip one over and it ends up on the carpet. So whenever I need to dye an egg, I take it into the kitchen, dye it, and bring it back out here to work on it. And I did that when I had my class out here too. I did not want jars of dye with 10 people around a table. I thought that was a bit dangerous.
Yes. Do you wear gloves?
I don't. You know, you get a little bit, but again, it's water soluble, easily washes off. One thing you do have to be careful when you start an egg is that your hands are completely grease-free. You can't have lunch and have slightly greasy hands and start working on
Or
it.
it will resist.
Yes, that will keep the dye from taking on those areas. So, yeah, you do have to wash your hands.
Well, let's take a look at some of these. Here's an unusual one here I'm looking at.
This one actually comes from some discovered Trypillian pottery in the Ukraine. They did some excavation and found this very early pottery, which were these three colors: dark, very dark brown or black, brown, and then white or light tan. You can also do very effective Trypillian kind of eggs using the brown eggs. And so these are some of the themes that they found on these pottery, and it seems very apropos since they are Ukrainian shards of pottery, and taken the designs and used them. I really have a lot of fun, making my own kinds of design. I had, for example, a herd of goats. So I put little goat emblems on this one, and I just have a whole repertoire of the design elements that I use on the eggs. And you just sort of put them together. You think, well, okay, let's have a little sun in each of these quadrants with the goats in them, and let's have some red dots, and let's have the yellow waves going around it. That would look nice. And I want with this one some wheat elements in the border, and you just kind of go and do it ad lib as you go along. And then I have many books of official designs that have been done by people in the past that I've reproduced. So I do both kinds of eggs, my own and successful, beautiful eggs that have
And I
other people
like
have made.
some of them, like this one with the goats, become a part of you. They represent you, and you're a very talented person. I haven't known you very long, but just getting to know you, you're in the Cantus Angelicus choir.
Right.
You do gardening, lots of gardening, sounds like.
I write poetry, actually.
You write poetry, my goodness.
Yeah.
You're a swimmer. You raise these animals. There was something else. Oh, dancing.
Yes, I belong to a group that does English country dancing every Friday night. And some of us that have gotten into it more seriously have actually created costumes. We have several costumes. We have early American. Our group was asked to perform for the sesquicentennial, Iowa sesquicentennial a few years ago. We got an Iowa Arts Council grant that covered the costume making, and that was a very exciting event. We also have very, very old costumes from the Victorian period and Elizabethan, actually I should have said Elizabethan period, with the big hoop skirts and all, and it's really, really fun to dance in those costumes. And you just feel like this is where this dancing, really shines.
Fun.
Yeah,
sounds like a
lot of fun.
wonderful life you have here with your chickens and everything. But back to the eggs. I hear peeping. Back to the eggs. This one is different because it's got blue and purple, violety colors.
Yeah, very unusual color scheme here. Yeah, this one. Yeah, this one I actually had to paint on the yellow, which is very unusual, because if I hadn't painted on the yellow, then when I dipped in blue, it would have turned into green. So if you want a pure blue and yellow, you paint on the yellow. But that worked out very well. I'm actually very pleased with this color combination.
It is, it's gorgeous. And I see a date. Do you always date?
No, I don't. I just happened to on this particular
2002.
one. Yeah, so this one I just made, I think a week ago, something like that. And sometimes when I make one for somebody, a birthday present for somebody, I'll put the date maybe, and even maybe their name or
what a wonderful gift.
Some personalized.
Idea.
It's a great gift, yeah.
And then this one too. Very different colors.
Yeah, different colors, and also a very sort of different way of dividing the egg, geometrically dividing it. So it has not a border that just goes around one way, but it goes around and separates, leaving 3 separate large areas for a major design.
I am looking at this design, and I don't have my glasses on, and I would have to wear them if I were doing this. But
needless to say, I have my reading glasses for.
My goodness, those are tiny, tiny little dots.
Yeah, you have to really sort of focus on the microscopic kind of level, but it's very fulfilling to me. I enjoy doing that.
This one feels a little different to me.
This one,
is there a
it is
reason?
a blown egg. It's an older egg, who knows. Each chicken egg actually has a different texture to it. I'm doing a trade. I also have some golden pheasants outside, and my little female is about to start laying eggs, and I don't have an incubator, and she won't successfully raise these little, she won't successfully sit on her own eggs. And then a lady that came from Sigourney to my workshop has just bought some ducks. So we're going to do a one-for-one trade. She's going to give me duck eggs to decorate, and I'm going to give her fertile pheasant eggs, golden pheasant eggs.
So pheasant eggs, how big are they?
They are about 1/3 of the size of, or maybe almost half the size of a small chicken egg.
Okay. And what's the largest that you've worked on? Ostrich?
I have,
maybe?
there's a Rhea egg. And
egg.
yeah, so that's close to the size of an ostrich egg.
Okay.
And they take a lot of work, and because they have a very strong shell on the outside, you have to, maybe for an hour they have to sit in this vinegar solution to really etch away so that they will take the dye. But duck eggs are silky. They are so smooth and delightful to work on, and they're in between the size of a chicken egg and a duck egg and a goose egg.
Okay. This one I really like. It's basically what, 3 color?
Yeah, it's
4
2.
counting the white.
Yeah, and it's several shades of blue. So you put the egg in the dye just for a moment to get a very light blue, and then you cover some of the areas with a light blue, and then you put it in the same blue again for a longer time, and then you get a darker shade of it. So that's unusual. The other thing unusual about this egg is that the band, the border, goes sideways. So it's not, symmetrical around the egg. And that, gives you a very nice rounded surface on which to do your focus stars in this case.
And I imagine your design has to fit your egg.
Yes, yes. For certain designs, you want a very much more rounded egg. For the design I just did on this one here, the most ideal shape would have been a very elongated egg, so that each of these curved areas could have been just tall instead of sort of widening out to a large egg. So you definitely are choosing the design to the egg.
Hold them still.
Okay. This is another unusual design. I want to say more simple, but I don't think it's simple at all.
Well, the egg division of it is not simple. It's a variation of a 40 triangles one, where you would actually divide each of these squares in half, or similar to that. And that indicated in Ukrainian tradition all the different facets of one's life. Whether it's raising children and farming, they consider there's 40 aspects. And if you gave an adult or somebody just getting married a 40 triangles egg, that would really bless all the complete aspects of their life.
Also looking at this one, knowing how dye works, this was kind of difficult because of the colors. You've got the yellow, which needs to stay pure, and the green and the red, which has to stay separate.
Right. So again, I painted on the green, but a little bit sloppily, and then just use the Kistka to do the individual little elements of the star on there, and then let the red and the black cover over the areas that sort of slopped in the green paint. And that also was a brown egg.
A
very
that's why
light
it's looking
brown.
a little warm.
Yeah.
Oh, another very, very detailed design.
With a very stylized chicken on the front. A chicken is a very common element. It indicates fertility and abundance. Also, this is a traditional Ukrainian color pattern where there are there's yellows and oranges and reds, and then a final color of black with just a touch of green here and there to really let it stand out. So this is the traditional series of colors for Ukrainian eggs.
Now, in the article I was reading, this lady, although she only worked on these 40 days a year during Lent, she said she'd wake up in the middle of the night and write down ideas the rest of the year. Do you ever find ideas coming to you?
I think I do sometimes. I don't restrict myself to the 40 days before Lent. You know, that might be traditional, but I don't, you know, especially when I have, you know, things I want to celebrate or gifts I want to give people. This, for example, it's a Valentine's egg that I gave to my husband. It has the red heart element in it, and also bees. Bees and spiders, interestingly, are very auspicious.
Spiders?
Yes, spiders, actually.
Bees, okay. Spiders, no.
No, spiders in Ukrainian tradition are they actually indicate healing and integrity and patience. I mean, they have these really...
Patience? Okay, the web spinning, yes.
Right.
Oh.
So they're very positive elements to see spiders on there.
And I want to look at this one over here. This one looks like it has a lot of teeny tiny.
And that was also a very, very light brown egg. You know, very, very light. Actually, I have this one kind of chicken, or I used to, that is called Araucana. And they lay blue and green eggs, slightly blue and green eggs. And I've done one with a blue background, you know, slightly blue is my first color.
Those would be beautiful.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite here?
Oh, I think actually the one you just held up is probably, for some reason, it's a very odd shaped egg. It's kind of fat, almost roundish, and it's very complicated. And I've liked this egg a lot. I've been doing some digital photography of the eggs, and this is one of them that I really enjoyed the pictures of.
Without my glasses, it has a pink look, a little pink.
Yeah, the egg, the red turned out a little bit, and one of the reasons it looks pink actually is because there's a lot of white detail in there.
It's so tiny that the white, your eye visually mixes it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of us need to really appreciate the egg, reading glasses, as well as making the egg.
Look at this one.
That's a very simple egg.
Looks very folk artish.
Yeah, and once again, a very stylized chicken. A very simple floral border. I like that one, actually. I like that one a lot.
How long does it take you to do an egg?
Well, it actually depends on the kind of egg. This egg here would probably take me only about an hour. Now,
really?
This egg, for example, which is quite detailed, it's very, very complex. Get the glasses out for that one.
Oh, wow.
That one probably took me 4 hours, something
and
like
that's amazing, too. That looks like a musical instrument
that.
kind of thing.
Kind of does.
Piano or...
yeah, it looks like piano keys a little bit. Yeah, so this, sometimes I take a design that was meant for a goose egg, which means you can get a lot more design elements on it, and try to fit that onto a chicken egg, because I don't happen to have any goose eggs, and that gets very complex looking. And I think this is one of those kinds of eggs.
And this is all drawn out ahead.
Well, the main design elements are, you don't draw every tiny little sketching line in there, but the basics are all the border lines are definitely in there. All the triangles and the squares going around the side, you definitely need to have some idea, because you need to draw triangles around and they need to meet at the other end.
I was just going to say, there's a real challenge also to keep that line going correctly.
Some people have actual lathes that they can insert the egg into, and then you can just hold the pencil there, and it will meet on the other side at exactly the same point. And I have one, but it somehow doesn't quite do it. So I've gotten very good at just drawing. If I've sketched it out with pencil and can just correct my mistakes afterwards, that works pretty well. One thing I've really learned is that you have to be in a very settled state to make these eggs, because if you're breathing very hard, then you can't draw, very precise straight lines.
I also notice sometimes I am a coffee drinker. I can't drink a lot of caffeine.
No, you can't. And the other thing, I always draw toward me. I find that I have more control if I'm moving toward me. And I also have a breathing thing where I take a breath before I draw the line. I either am not breathing or I'm slowly breathing out. But I'm never inhaling when I am making
doing
a line.
that fine detail.
Yeah. So it's all part of the learning process, seeing what works.
And this is a different one.
This is one I made several of as Christmas ornaments. So this is proof that I don't just do it during Easter. And this is a brown egg, and it's very much fun to look at different books of different designs and take things from it. So for example, if you ever look at a snowflake book, you know, they are so beautiful and intricate and rich, and each one different. And you can just put incredible snowflakes on each side, you know, just copying them out of that book. I've gotten certain ethnic design books, for example, Japanese fabric design, and made Japanese fabric eggs. And you can get American quilting patterns.
Oh, yeah.
And you can make imitation quilt. Yeah, a lot of quilt stuff on there. In fact, to really imitate the quilt look, you can even make the dashed lines, you know, to indicate the stitching.
Right. I was going to ask, do you typically use the Stylus thing, the Kistka, with the larger opening first and do the tiny detail later with the finest?
Well, actually probably not, because a lot of times the first thing you do is these very tiny border lines, because you want to get the whole egg divided. And one design element you often use is this tiny parallel lines here, because it looks more impressive than one dark white line. It just gives it a more, and sometimes you even color the inside of that line some particular color. In this case, I colored it red. I didn't want that, you know, to be a black line. So a lot of times, you know, you're just sort of mixing as you go along. You do some things, you know, you want really fine, then you come to a place where you're filling an area in and you use the large Kistka. So you just kind of mix and match, and you're picking them up, putting them down. And now this is the one I wanted to really have my students have an experience of creating something that wasn't just too simple. You know, I wanted them to have something they were really proud of when they went home. So I actually had them make this particular egg with the star on it. And we just did the whole thing step by step. I wanted them to have the experience of this beautiful, pretty complicated border, you know, to whatever extent they could do it. And I was amazed at how well they did. And some of them, you know, that had a steady hand. There was one 11-year-old girl. She was so beautifully focused, and she did a fabulous job. She did a very successful, complicated looking, and she was so proud of that egg.
Oh, wow.
It was really
I know
satisfying.
this article, it says the only thing it takes is a lot of patience and love.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and you can very quickly develop the, you know, the little techniques that you need to just be very precise with your design. So this is the egg that we actually made in our class. So I was very pleased that they could do that for me. Let's see what other one we can show you. This is a very simple design with 4 borders, and this is one that I sometimes give to people as presents, putting their name or the event. You know, you have writing areas here. I didn't do that one on this particular egg.
Looks like ribbon.
Yeah. And one of the most common symbols used in almost every Ukrainian egg is the circle. You know, you have some unbroken band, you know. And, oh, I did this in 2001. I did have a little bit of writing
That's
on
nice
this
that
one.
you did. Do you sign them?
No, I never have done that. You know, it'd be an
Maybe you should
interesting
do a
thing.
few,
It would be an
sign
interesting thing to do. Yeah. One commission I got last year was a very interesting commission. I had a friend whose father was in a car accident. He had gone out and he had picked up 2 dozen farm fresh eggs. And he had a pretty serious car accident. You know, he was in the hospital. When the ambulance came and all, and the family came to where the car crash had happened, 4 of these eggs had not been broken. They were lying there on the grass. And he had this thought in the middle of the night that we needed to preserve these eggs, and that Susie needed to make them into some, you know, somehow for him they were a symbol of, you know, this fragile thing that had survived, just as his father had survived. So I told him, he said, shall I blow them out? Shall I boil them? I said, no. I said, put them in overnight mail, raw, beautifully packed.
Oh my goodness, you trusted them in the mail.
Yeah, I mail them quite successfully and quite often, so that worked out very well. And I think he was very, very pleased with the results, and I think his father was very touched by receiving this, this emblem of his surviving the accident. In fact, some of the other family members who were very close to him also got one of those 4 eggs.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Yeah. Oh, these are really treasures. I would think that family members would really love to have one or a special gift, because not everyone can do this, and they're beautiful. Let's take a quick look at your tools that you said, rather than the Kistkas.
Kistka, right.
You have a new way, not a new way, but an additional way you use the electric ones.
These are actually also Kistkas, but they are electric Kistkas. So they have the heating elements in them, and you plug them in, and that way you do have to continually put little bits of wax in them as you're going, but the heat remains constant. So you're not always having to heat over the candle, and the result is a little more, even and predictable. But for anybody beginning this process, these are very satisfying, wonderfully made tools. So, even the manual ones are just fine. Now, the little bit of a difference is that when you're using the electric ones, you do, because you're not getting the charcoal element of the wax there. If you just used regular candle wax, the undyed beeswax, you would hardly be able to see it on the egg. So you have to get this already pre-darkened. I guess they mix a little dark color into it. So use this black wax, and it comes out looking exactly the same as if you had used the Kistka over the flame.
So it doesn't look black?
It looks like this. So it's darkened, but this is using my electric. So it works very well. So this is for those of us that are serious addicts.
Right, serious.
Yeah, seriously into it.
Well, thank you for sharing this Ukrainian egg tradition with us here in Fairfield. It's nice to know that you're here, and all your talents, and that you share with the community. And like I said, the Art Association, I think, would love to have you teach a class.
Well, we can consider it for next year for sure.
Yeah. So I think we'll take a look at your baby chicks.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, we're going to finish up here with your little chicks that are about 5 days old. And what kind are they?
These are called Black Australorp. Usually I get a mixture of chickens, but what happens after a couple of years is that, the chicks that you have, the babies, tend up to be mixed breeds, and they get pretty scruffy looking. And this way I will have, all the chicks and all the eggs, which will be fertilized eggs, because one of these, I don't know which one, is actually a little baby rooster. So we will have this, and they will turn pure black when they're older. This beautiful glossy black with kind of green highlights and dark eyes. They're a very gentle kind of chicken. And because I've hand raised them, they will always be very, very tame. I'll be able to go into the hen house and actually pick the chickens up, which I like to do.
My parents raised chickens in California and when I was born, I was always told that I got my mother out of the chicken business. But I hear stories about them, and I know it was a lot of work for them, but so how many do you raise?
Well, I just, I sort of started fresh because I had a fox that came and ate most of my chickens about a year ago. So a friend gave me 2 just so I'd have, a few little eggs to have. And then I have 13 here. So, it'll be like 15, it's just a small little grouping of them.
And they're enough to raise, to supply the eggs.
Oh, definitely.
To eat and to work on.
Eat and work on, and give to friends or sell a few here and there. Yeah, this is plenty. And also they'll come out and help me eat bugs in the garden sometimes. And they're very wonderful to have around. They also supply chicken manure for the garden, and this just seems to be part of, a country life, is to have some kind of animals around. And I really like the birds. You know, if you're gone for the weekend, they don't require milking every day like my goats did.
Uh-huh.
So they're
Well,
delightful.
once again, thank you very much for sharing this wonderful talent with our Fairfield people. Thank you.
You're very welcome.